Hi, my name is Matt, and this is the hardest story I've ever had to share. I've never told anyone, not my closest friends, not my family, not a single soul who knew me back then. If I'm honest, the only reason I'm telling it now is because it still eats at me. It never leaves. Even after all these years, it still creeps up on me when I'm alone, especially late at night, when the house is quiet and there's nothing to distract me. Sometimes I wonder if telling this story is selfish, like I'm unburdening myself, at the expense of people who can't defend themselves anymore, but at the same time, maybe telling it is the only way I'll ever stop replaying every moment over and over in my head. So here it is. This is the story of the day I broke the rules on purpose. A day that could have ended my career, maybe even put me behind bars, and yet I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I was working as a nurse on a military base. If you've never been on a base, you probably imagine something out of a movie: big hangars, salutes, marching, yelling. And sure, sometimes it looks like that, but the was different. It was this long hallway with white tile floors that never really got clean, no matter how much bleach you poured on them. The smell was part antiseptic, part stale coffee, part something I can never describe. A sort of nervous energy that clung to the walls. There was always this hum in the background, the hum of fluorescent lights, monitors beeping, the low murmur of people talking in clipped voices. People always moved quickly, not running because running meant panic, and panic was the one thing you never let yourself show. I'd been there a few years, long enough to stop jumping every time the radio squawked with a trauma code, but not so long that I'd stopped caring. On a base like that, accidents happen all the time. Training is relentless. Heat stroke, dehydration, sprains, concussions, a few nasty vehicle wrecks. Every couple months, someone wouldn't make it. And every single time, the mood shifted in the hallways. It was like the building itself knew when death had walked in, but that day was different. It was a flight incident. Flight incidents were the words no one wanted to hear, because they usually meant someone wasn't coming home. The call came over the radio just after 1 in the afternoon. I remember because I was standing in the supply closet trying to find the last bag of saline. The second the dispatcher said, "Flight incident," the entire fell silent for a breath. People made eye contact just for a second, and you could see the same thought in every face. Please don't let this be as bad as it sounds. About 20 minutes later, the pilot came in. He walked on his own 2 feet. His uniform was torn in places, streaked with dirt and smoke, but he was alive. That should have been reassuring. But the way he looked, I don't think I've ever seen someone so hollow. He moved like he'd been disconnected from himself, like he was going through the motions on autopilot. His eyes didn't focus on anything, he just kept blinking. Like maybe when he opened them again, he'd be somewhere else. That's survivor's guilt. It's not always tears or screaming, sometimes it's just this, emptiness. Like all the noise inside you has been muted. I was the highest-ranking nurse on shift that day, which meant the chain of custody blood draw fell to me. For anyone unfamiliar, a chain of custody blood draw is serious business. Every person who touches those vials has to sign for them. There are forms, sealed bags, timestamps. It's designed to prove that no one tampered with the evidence. Because in cases like this, they have to know if drugs or alcohol were involved. It's standard. But that doesn't mean it feels routine. He sat down on the gurney without me asking, didn't say a word, didn't look up. His hands were shaking. He kept them folded together so tight his knuckles turned white. While I prepped the needle and laid out the vials, the room started filling up. First a lieutenant, someone from his squadron. Then his commanding officer, then a couple of other men I recognized only because they wore higher rank insignia than anyone else. Nobody was speaking. They were just there watching. The pilot didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he noticed but didn't care. When I tied the tourniquet around his arm, he finally glanced up just for a second, and I caught this look. It was like he was bracing for impact, and it struck me in that moment. he believed this was the beginning of the end. I don't know why I did it. But when I drew his blood, I pulled to extra vials. I'd always been taught to do that just in case. Usually, if you didn't need them, you disposed of them, no big deal. But this time, instead of tossing them in the bin, I slipped them into the pocket of my SCRUBS. It wasn't some calculated decision. It wasn't even conscious, really. It was more like a reflex I didn't fully understand. After that, things moved fast. I labeled the vials, had them signed off, and sent to the lab. The pilot was cleared of immediate medical issues, so his CO walked him out. The squadron followed. And I stood there alone, surrounded by the hush that follows trauma. I tried to go back to my normal duties, I really did. But every time I walked past the gurney he'd been sitting on, I felt this tightness in my chest. About an hour later, my phone rang. I picked it up, expecting some routine question about meds or charting, but it wasn't that. It was the lab. Their voice was calm, too calm. They told me that during processing, the vials had been dropped, shattered, irretrievable. I felt this cold sweep up from my stomach into my throat, because I knew before they even finished explaining what that meant, we had to redraw, and in the time since he'd left, that pilot had almost certainly been drinking. Because that's what they did. When you lost people you trained lived with you went to the bar. It wasn't protocol, but it was survival. Now, any alcohol in his blood would be interpreted as evidence that he'd been drunk on duty, and that would destroy him. I tried to tell myself that maybe he hadn't been drinking. Maybe he just sat there with water, but in my gut, I knew better. When he came back, he looked even worse. His CO stood beside him, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. Neither of them said a word. I gestured to the chair and he sat, no protest, just resignation. While I prepped the needle again, my hands were trembling so badly I had to take a breath to steady them. The CO finally cleared his throat. He didn't meet my eyes when he spoke. We know this isn't on you, he said quietly. I nodded, but didn't reply because what could I say? The needle slid in easily muscle memory. Blood filled the vials, bright red, alive, and I knew that sample would condemn him. I paused. I looked at the man in front of me, this man who'd done nothing but survive. His career, everything he'd worked for, would be erased because he tried to cope with loss. So I did the only thing I could think of. I set the fresh vials down on the tray. And I said, "Look at me." He didn't react. I raised my voice. Just enough to break through. "Look at me." His eyes lifted, tired, defeated. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the 2 original vials, held them up. "This is from earlier," I said. "This is your clean sample." He stared at them like he couldn't quite believe it. I picked up the fresh blood and, without ceremony, dropped it into the sharps container. The finality of that sound, glass against plastic, was like a bell tolling in my chest. I put the old vials in the evidence bag. I signed the chain of custody log. The only thing I falsified was the time. That was enough to end me if anyone ever found out. Neither of them spoke. The CO's jaw worked like he was trying to form words, but he couldn't. The pilot didn't look away from me until I turned to place the paperwork on the counter. They left quietly. No thank you. No nods, because to acknowledge it out loud would have made it real. I never saw either of them again. I don't know what happened. I hope he kept flying. I hope he found a way to forgive himself. As for me, I went home and sat in my car for almost an hour before I had the strength to go inside. I felt like my chest was full of broken glass. And in that moment, I honestly didn't know if I'd done the right thing, but now, looking back after all these years, I know I did, even if it cost me my peace of mind. Even if it means I'll carry that secret until the day I die. Some lines you cross because your conscience demands it. Some rules deserve to be broken, and if I had to do it again, I wouldn't hesitate. If you're still here, if you made it this far, thank you. I never thought I'd tell this story. Never thought I'd say these words out loud, but it feels lighter somehow. If you'd like to hear more true stories like this about the choices we make, the consequences we carry, consider subscribing. You never know what someone else is carrying around in silence. And maybe, just maybe, talking about it is the first step toward letting it go.